sister's a therapist and I tell jokes. We both want to help all kinds of folks.
Hello, and welcome to My Sister's a Therapist. My name is Virginia Jones. I am not now and have never been a therapist. I'm a stand-up comedian, but luckily I have a sister.
And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm Laura Ryan, but my main credit is sister to Laugh Legend, Virginia Jones.
I do like Laugh Legend. Laura, how are you doing?
I'm having a month.
Yeah.
I've always been of the mind that our listeners were mostly women, but I found out recently that 50% of our listeners are in fact men.
So the men who tell me, I know I shouldn't be listening to this, or I know this isn't for me, you're not alone.
Half of you shouldn't be listening, but you still are. I have a friend who's also a listener. Shout out to Kyra. Number one, she couldn't believe any man ever listened to this podcast. But she said, can you imagine a man trying to date either of you after they listen to this
Right.
podcast?
It's been a concern.
She said he would have to be the strongest in the whole world.
Laura was just going through old artwork from her child.
These are good times.
And she found one from third grade.
Oh, no, that's not third grade. That was probably second.
These distinctions are not important to me as a non-child owner.
I don't own my child. I claim no ownership to him whatsoever.
He's just a dude who lives with you. He was asked to write a story about snowmen. He drew a picture and it said, if I were a snowman, I would drive around in a car with my friends and drink beer.
And I thought, wow, how wonderful. I don't even remember him doing this, but I can't imagine that his teacher didn't think I was an alcoholic.
I guess.
Is this what you and your mom do on the
Right,
weekends?
just driving around drinking beer with snowmen, I guess. So, Laura, what are you talking about this week?
This is a listener topic from Rebecca. So thanks in advance, Rebecca.
Our listeners have really got us laying back and sitting on our laurels. They're really feeding us all kinds of great stuff.
Pretty much.
The stuff you want to talk about is the stuff we want to talk about.
Well, this is a topic that I've been fighting to talk about. Virginia has been telling me I couldn't.
Okay.
Now I get to, thanks to Rebecca.
Great.
Hello, greetings from El Paso, Texas. I have a request. Laura, in your experience on TikTok, are you aware of the trend of Gen Z people self-diagnosing themselves with autism and other disorders? A friend of mine has been telling me that there are TikTokers out there telling people not to go to therapists because they will not diagnose you correctly. I also have several students at UT El Paso who claim to be neurodivergent, but won't get the proper accommodations. Is this because they don't want to ask for help? Or are they claiming neurodivergence because it's trendy? Or have they self-diagnosed themselves as a suggestion of some influencer? As a clinician, I'd love your take on this, maybe on the podcast.
Item one, the children, and here I'm talking about Gen Z and Alpha.
I believe the children are our future.
The children have an almost religious belief about the algorithm. They feel like if the algorithm shows it to you, it's meant to be. And alternately, if the algorithm doesn't show you something, you're not supposed to look at it. I have followers. They're not always shown my content. Sometimes I have something that gets a little bit hot and people will say, oh, I haven't seen you for so long. And I say, well, you could always look at my page whenever you want to. And oh, but I just wait.
I have to look into the seer stones.
Someone said, I'm sorry, I missed you. So I came to your page and looked at your TikToks. I'm sorry to be a creeper. Ma'am,
I want you to look at all my TikToks. That's why they're
being
public.
A creeper. Right. When I first got on TikTok, I watched a very interesting video about a Black woman getting a wig installed, which I had no idea that that was what happened. I watched all of it. So TikTok was like, she wants to see wig install videos.
Well, are you saying that you don't? Because I do. That's half of my feed.
Once I'd watched 3 or 4, I get it.
I still want to see it all because I want to see the lace front cut out and then I want to see the reveal after they put the makeup on.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing. It's like, that actually
amazing.
is magic. That is actually.
TikTok thought that I was a Black woman who was very interested in getting a wig installed. When you are interested in videos about ADHD or ADHD or whatever, TikTok is going to feed you more videos.
Right.
It's not diagnosing you. It's just noticing your interests and noticing that you're interested in things that other autistic people are interested in.
Well, I don't think getting a lot in my feed means I'm being diagnosed. I think what Rebecca is saying is that these kids are just watching a bunch of autism videos and determining based on what they've learned that they themselves are autistic.
So I have seen content like that. Like TikTok taught me I was ADHD. And the other thing is very well-meaning creators will create false equivalencies and say, I have ADHD and sometimes my left foot itches. So if you have an itchy foot, enjoy your ADHD diagnosis.
Right. That is a correlation, not a
Not
causation.
causation.
They might be happening at the same time, but that does not mean they're related. Rebecca inspired me. Actually, to be fair, my TikTok feed is what diagnosed my ADHD. It also diagnosed my
Perimenopausal status.
look out for that upcoming episode. A friend of mine teases me because ADHD and autism are two things that have really come on the radar for me since I got on TikTok. And I have gotten much better with diagnosing my clients with autism.
Right.
Because my content, this will shock you, is mostly therapists. And so they'll tell you, here's some tells to look for if you think your client might be autistic. And I'm going with it. Basically, one of my best friends, she made up a song for me because I was telling her everybody I know or meet or whatever, I'm just determining has autism. So she says, everybody's autistic, autistic, autistic. Hooray! Autistic, autistic, autistic today.
So to Rebecca's last comment, almost everybody is neurodivergent.
Rebecca inspired me to actually read this book that I have called Is This Autism? A Companion Guide for Diagnosing by DONNA Henderson, Sarah Wayland, and JAMELL White. The reason I'm reading it all out is this is our only source for today. So every quote we have will be from this book.
Well, let's talk a little bit about my perception of autism through the years.
Sure.
First person who I knew who told me he was on the spectrum was a friend of mine in Portland. And he explained to me that he had something called Asperger's syndrome, which we don't call it that anymore.
And why not?
Because Dr. Asperger was a Nazi.
But you'll notice that our friend Elon Musk still uses the term Asperger's to refer to himself.
He doesn't want to be accused of being woke or sensitive to anything that might bother other people.
And also, he's a Nazi.
He's a Nazi. So it all makes sense. But it blew my mind. Like my friend was explaining to me some of his traits and characteristics. And certainly I recognized that he had certain social limitations and he would get hyper-focused on stuff. Like one time he was trying to get to my house and he was on the train and he kept spacing out and missing the train stop, which has happened to all of us. Everybody has gotten distracted by something and has missed their stop, but he did it 10 times and he kept going all the way to the terminus and then all the way back. He just could not get off at the right stop in that moment. There's all kinds of levels of the spectrum, but knowing him helped me understand some of the people in my past and from school who we thought were
every man you've ever dated.
And every man I've ever dated and my father. I just thought they were a little odd or a little off. They were on the spectrum.
And that's sort of what I've been able to arrive at. And I'm glad I've read this book because now I can officially diagnose. I'm just without just TikTok diagnostics. It's always this person that comes in and you're looking at him and you're like, what's up? The social stuff isn't working out for you. You're having difficulty on the job. You have these temper things. You're hitting yourself and stuff.
Right.
That's not everybody, but I have had this over the years where I'm sort of stumped with people and I'm trying to figure out what is it. And now I have determined that it's autism, but this person hasn't been diagnosed because very few people have.
Autistics can be easily misdiagnosed. When their autism is not recognized, they can be given other diagnoses. While some of these diagnoses are indeed co-occurring challenges, such as anxiety and ADHD, others may be inappropriate and even damaging. There's a long history of misdiagnosing unrecognized autistics. As Jessica Wright wrote in 2015, in the 1950s and 1960s, thousands of children who had autism were either completely missed or were saddled with a wrong label. Subsequent studies have borne this out. For example, Kei Takara and colleagues in 2015 reported that autistic people were frequently diagnosed with schizophrenia, psychotic disorder, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and personality disorder. Misdiagnoses can lead to interventions and medications that are at best ineffective and at worst harmful. Oh, you have schizophrenia. This is incurable.
I've heard this from some of my autistic clients. They have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder or a personality disorder. And I'm sitting in front of them and I don't know how to explain it, but as a therapist, once you've seen stuff enough, you can kind of sniff it out.
Get a vibe.
The vibe isn't there for these things. It just kind of leaves me scratching my head, but it's because it's an incorrect diagnosis. You're going to medicate for bipolar disorder when you don't have it? What the hell was that like?
Medicating for bipolar disorder can be like horse tranks. Like it's heavy
serious.
Stuff.
It's serious. And there are a lot of side effects. And if I didn't even have it at all, so it's not going to treat my symptoms because I don't have bipolar disorder. I have a neurodivergent brain, which at the moment there really isn't any treatment for, except stimulants if you have the ADHD part.
And my understanding is more about understanding where your limitations, impulses, strengths come from. Many people who I know who have been diagnosed recently, it is like, oh, I just thought these were my little weird things that I had individually stumbled upon or created or were I born. And I now understand they're all part of the same one thing. There's not 20 things wrong with me. There's one thing that I live under.
I have an interesting brain formation.
Right.
And so these are the results of that. Speaking of TikTok, I saw a lady the other day who was saying, everyone talks about how neurodivergence is such a gift and it's so cool. And she's like, it's kept me from keeping a job. A lot of these folks, especially when you're further into the autism spectrum, it's really tough to manage this society because it's not built for people with autism.
A friend of mine from college had Tourette syndrome, but I did think, or I perceived that his Tourette syndrome, although it made it very dangerous for him to drive and really difficult for him to do a lot of things, I think it made his brain so fast. Not everything has a silver lining like that, but I think the sea change in the description of neurodivergence and the discussion of neurodivergence is seeing that it's not all bad and some of it can be positive. I understand that people who are further down the spectrum will have challenges that other people don't, but I think hyperfocus.
It works great when it's working.
You can know the most about Japanese ceramics that anyone's ever known before, even more than Japanese ceramicists. You can focus in and acquire the details and retain the details of information the way that other people can't or wouldn't be compelled to. But also, sometimes you have trouble making changes or having schedule conflicts or doing other stuff that comes easier to other people.
There's a creator who I love on TikTok named Generic Art Dad, and he is autistic. And he did a poll because he was saying, I'm really getting tired of my day job. Can anyone tell me, as a person with neurodivergence, what is a great job that you're currently doing that you feel like this brain style, this thinking style works? He was reading them off, and number one was therapist.
Wow. Why is that, do you think?
So the thing you were just talking about, I have this incredible memory of the weirdest little details. It makes people feel really special when I say, oh, remember 6 years ago when you told me that story about your sister and this was the outcome? Because I can see patterns. Pattern recognition, I think, has really helped me a lot with my job. That's what gives me the sniff test. I'm noticing these patterns and I'm trying to compare them to other folks that I've worked with who have the same patterns. And that's how I'm able to diagnose. I don't officially diagnose. I diagnose privately in my head. But I think also this ability to kind of work on the fly and keep things loose is really good. I had a client the other day who I have done several hypnosis sessions with, and we had just completed one. He said, how is it that you always come up with the best hypnosis session for that moment in that day? I don't know.
Just the thing
I'm just winging it because I don't have a plan. Right. I go in there blind. I figure it out and I go, yeah, maybe this technique would be good. And that's part of why I like my job because I don't have to plan anything.
I went to school for fashion design, for apparel design. But in retrospect, I think that as a Gen Xer, it was an art degree that I felt like I could get a job with because all things being equal, I probably would have just gotten an art degree. I had one fashion designer job where I was an assistant designer. And then after that, I was recruited into a job called development, which I think is becoming more and more common, but it used to be really hard to explain to people what my job is. But my job is solving problems in between a concept and an actual item, the product.
Is it macro development? Are you working for Lumen?
I am a micro data refiner. Recently, I have accepted about myself that I am ADHD and just getting worse, really, no improvement. And I used to think how odd, how strange that I have stumbled upon this job, which is all about organization and scheduling, recurring tasks, keeping a balance. And I shouldn't be doing this because of my brain. I've come to understand that it's actually kind of the ideal job for me because it's always problem solving. It's always something new. There's a lot of discovery. There's a lot of research, and all of the scheduling and calendars and stuff help keep me on track on that. These are part of the processes that I do, but the disadvantage is that I always want to do the thing that is most interesting to me, and I never want to do the thing that is least interesting to me, but they both have to get done.
That's because you're dopamine seeking, because it's hard to get things done because our brains don't make enough dopamine. I had a client just yesterday, in fact, who was telling me she's self-employed and she's really struggling because she's decided for some reason to stop taking her ADHD medication. She has self-diagnosed as ADHD, and I think she's right. So that's autism and ADHD, which is most of my clients. I don't usually have just autism. It's usually the mix. She was saying, I'm waking up, I'm trying to plan my day and schedule and do the things. And basically I do domestic labor and take a nap, and then it's 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
We don't do well with open schedules. The idea of retirement actually really scares me because I don't think I'll do anything. So the problem that a lot of people talk about on TikTok when it comes to autism, there's a lot of creators that are BIPOC who were never diagnosed with autism because they were BIPOC. So I'm going to read from the book. If a test is normed primarily on white males who receive an early diagnosis of autism, and we use that test to define who is allowed into research studies, the data we get from those studies will reflect white males who get an early autism diagnosis. It will not necessarily reflect other groups, such as autistic people of other genders, minority groups, or those who have less obvious presentations of autism. These individuals are then excluded from further studies, including those that define new normative groups, and on it goes. When you're not a white male, you're kind of screwed. Like somebody was saying this the other day, why are women minorities? We are half of the human population. If you listen back to our misogyny episode, you will notice that this problem also happens with women, where if you're not a white male, you're not really considered. And that's what I notice a lot is I have women with autism who come and work with me and they have never been diagnosed.
Because it does present differently. And I don't know if that's a gender divide or if that's a socialization divide. I suspect that it's the latter. I remember when one of my friends had a girl child who was diagnosed as being spectrumy, and she was really
an official diagnosis being spectrumy.
Just having a touch of spectrumy. But when we read up on it, we discovered that because we are pressured to make other people comfortable, to fit in, girls on the spectrum are able to figure out how to present as neurotypical by the time they're teenagers, because they're always looking at other cues based on other people.
And they've been socially ostracized.
Yeah.
So they learn how to mask a lot.
Researchers are beginning to understand and address this issue. For example, Anila DeMello and her colleagues reviewed an MIT database of those diagnosed autistics. Only 81% of the men and only 50% of the women met the ADOS cutoff score required for inclusion in autism studies. These were the individuals who were already diagnosed. So tell me what this blurb means.
What it means is that only 80% of the men and only 50% of the women in this study were allowed to be in this study. And these were people who had already been diagnosed. 19% of the men who had already been diagnosed as autistic were not allowed to be in this study. And 50% of the women who had already been diagnosed with autism didn't meet the requirements for this study.
So they'd been diagnosed elsewhere, but under these criterion, they did not meet.
Right, because these criterion were based on white males only.
Gotcha.
So all of these people who should have been included because they are in fact autistic were not, because they didn't meet the cutoff score, which is based on white males. So yet again, everything is for white males in this country.
I feel like we know that. Women are minorities because it is a decision that has been made. We're not the minority of humans, we're the minority of power.
Right. So one of the most common assumptions made about women is if she was autistic, someone else would have diagnosed it by now. As we will discuss shortly, there's an entire lost generation of autistic adults. At clients' age, the assumption that autism is always identified in early childhood becomes a bigger and bigger obstacle to diagnose. Even when clinicians do consider autism in their differential for adolescents and adults, they're often hesitant to diagnose when prior clinicians did not.
I have had a conversation with female friends that being an attractive girl keeps you from a diagnosis because it just doesn't meet anyone's idea of what autism looks like or is. I have a girlfriend who her life has been made a lot simpler and more clear since she has recognized where she is. Men get mad at her when she says, "Oh, I'm on the spectrum," because that doesn't fit in with their idea of what this hot girl does.
Wait, a man is mansplaining her autism to
her
her?
own autism to her. Exactly, because it's not their expectation. And she had not been diagnosed for years and years. She looked like a typical girl or like what you would expect.
Right.
And
a neurotypical woman.
Right.
She presents in that way, right? So we cannot and should not rule out autism simply because the client has some traits or behaviors that we personally code as non-autistic. Countless autistics have been told that they can't be autistic because they have good eye contact, they have a good sense of humor, they have friends, they are successful in their careers, they are socially motivated, they are athletic, they are likable, they are engaging, they're physically attractive. So it's tough because I don't think that TikTok made autism.
No.
I think that
TikTok made autism cool.
you know what? That might be true. The jury's not out on that one yet. I feel like Rebecca's feeling like all this stuff is coming out of left field. It's always been here because of misogyny, because of gender norming, because of all these things. A lot of it has been sort of covered up or hidden.
And because of a very limited view of what autism is. You're thinking about maybe the bottom 20% lowest functioning people. And when you know your friend who has a job and is successful in relationships, it doesn't seem like that.
Because it isn't like that. I mean, I'm thinking about all the autistic men I've dated. Like
Right.
they all had jobs. They all made good eye contact. I couldn't date someone that didn't have those qualities. So I'm thinking about these friends that I've had who something was just a little bit off. One of the things that I notice in my friend group or in people that I've dated, people with autism seem to monologue a lot and they're not picking up on my social cues that I'm ready for this
To be
conversation to be over.
Right.
So that's a big tell for me when someone comes to my office. But I've dated a lot of men who monologue at me, who have great jobs and are physically attractive and meeting all of these social things. A good sense of humor. I can't date someone without a good sense of
Right.
humor. That's impossible. I think a lot of people slip through the cracks because of these stereotypes.
Well, and growing up with our dad, enjoy your drink, everybody. We're used to being monologued at about whatever he was finding interesting at the time.
Usually I determine if I feel like I'm talking to my dad, I'm probably talking to someone with autism.
Right. Researchers such as John Constantino, Matthew Maynor, and their colleagues have found that compared to white children, youth from ethnic or minority backgrounds had more developmental delays, greater intellectual disability, more behavior problems, and or more autistic traits before they were identified as autistic. These authors and others have noted related findings, including lower diagnosis rates for Black children compared to white children, even when they have comparable autistic traits. I think this is more just about attention focus and focusing your attention on white boys. Even if a Black kid has autistic traits, it's more convenient to say, oh, they're a bad kid or they're disruptive or something. I think rather than saying, oh, this is because all research has been done on white autistic men, the underdiagnosis of minority people is because a teacher in the classroom, her Occam's razor, her shortest distance between two things is going to be the white boy has maybe a delay or is on the spectrum and the minority kids are just being bad.
So what you're telling me is it's racism, because I think that's part of it too. The assumption that Black children are going to be more disruptive and have more behavioral problems.
I want to talk about trains more.
No one's ever said that. I think that that's the issue. Racism, sexism, all of these things play a part in underdiagnosing people. And the result is that these people are just walking around out in the world. I didn't include this, but I read it in the book. Suicide and autism are very correlative.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is because folks didn't know that they were autistic. That's one of the things I read a lot in the book is I feel like an alien. I feel like everyone has a manual. That's one of the other big keys. When I hear from my client that it feels like everybody else has a user manual for life and they don't have it, that's usually an indicator to me that they have autism.
Yes. The feeling that I've had is like there was a day at school where everybody got this instruction that I didn't get and I don't know how to make it up.
Oh, so you think you might have autism?
Yeah, you've mentioned it.
Well, if you listen to the song, everybody's autistic, autistic, autistic. Hooray!
And we've talked about this before in our episode about musicians and neurodivergence and mental illness. I'm fascinated with Gary Numan's autism diagnosis.
It's the least surprising news that I've ever heard.
Well, it was just one of those things to understand that he really does feel safer in his car. And he really does think that he'd be better off dating a machine than a person.
Absolutely.
It's all clear.
He's telling the truth.
Yeah.
Autism is far more prevalent than previously believed. As our understanding of autism has evolved, prevalence rates have dramatically increased. The first estimate of the prevalence of autism was about 1 in every 2,222 children in 1966. That number has steadily increased through the past 4 decades. It was 1 in 667 in 1979, 1 in 150 in 2000, 1 in 59 in 2018, 1 in 54 just a few years later. And as the author is writing this book, it's 1 in 36. And this is probably also an underestimate.
I understand that it seems like every kid is autistic all of a sudden, but it's not that there are more autistic kids, it's that the kids are being diagnosed earlier and more frequently than in the past.
And more kinds of kids are being diagnosed.
Right. Because in the past, kids would either be misdiagnosed or their place on the spectrum was small enough to be ignored. They'd get lumped in with just general weirdness or someone who just didn't like creamy foods.
Or tight-fitting clothes.
But these people have always been around. We're just understanding more about them day to day. It's like saying suddenly all the kids are trans. No,
the kids were trans before. They just got murdered. They didn't have to tell anybody.
Or they didn't understand that it was an option, that could be a thing. They didn't have any role models to look to. They didn't have any place to put these feelings. So they would just muddle along and get through life as best they could.
If you think about Caitlyn Jenner's history, when she started dating Kris Jenner, she was living in the Playboy Mansion, but she had already started taking hormones. And if you watch the Kardashian show, she's wearing all of these kind of really loose fitting sweatshirts and things all the time. And I remember wondering,
oh, she's an athlete. Why is she so shy about her body?
Yeah. Right. And it's because she had developed breast tissue during her early transition, but she had abandoned it because her girlfriend, then wife, told her she didn't want her to do it. It's always been in Caitlyn Jenner's desire to be a woman, but because of the intense pressure of society, she couldn't live that way at the time. And I feel like this is probably the first time when you can live openly as a trans person, mostly. Until the last few months, this was a pretty good time to live your true self as a trans lady or man.
Well, and that television show was an interesting piece of information. Also, you can deny your gender and you can just live a really miserable life and be really unhappy and make your family miserable.
Yeah. And she did that for many years.
On this topic of frequency of diagnosis, as Johann Nyrenius and his colleagues noted, autistic individuals born prior to the mid-1990s are far less likely to have received a diagnosis before the age of 10 compared to those born after the year 2000. In line with this, Hjordis Atladottir and colleagues found that autism diagnoses were more than 4 times more common in individuals born between 1999 and 2001 compared to individuals born 10 years earlier. And of course, Hjordis Atladottir is a woman because her name means daughter of Atla.
I just had you read that because I couldn't pronounce any of those names.
So yes, confirmation that kids are being diagnosed earlier, which is good, which gives them more tools.
Another impossible name to pronounce, Treolak Brugha and colleagues found that while the rate of autism was steady across age groups, the rate of diagnosis was not. As John Elder Robinson observed, 3 to 10% of autistic adults were actually diagnosed.
Wow.
Which is not very many.
That's low.
Prior to 1980, the DSM still associated autism with schizophrenia. Autism did not appear in the DSM on its own until 1980, but it wasn't until the DSM-5 in 1994, with the inclusion of Asperger's and PDD-NOS, that individuals with less obvious or less disabling presentations were formally recognized. There's a lot of factors here about why autism seems to have sprung out from nowhere.
And what does PDD-MOS mean?
PDD-NOS means pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified.
Oh, okay.
Kind of a generic, like we don't know what this is.
It's the second time that autism has been mentioned in the same breath as schizophrenia. Is there any correlation between autism and schizophrenia or no?
No. The story that I've decided to make up about it is that it's the flat affect of both. Oftentimes people with schizophrenia will have this very flat way of speaking, and autistic people also do that.
I see.
Sometimes. Correlation, not causation.
Right.
Again.
You're like, oh, I recognize that this person talks like this person. I know that this person is schizophrenic, therefore. This quote starts with, we are not, quote, all a little bit autistic, unquote. A more accurate statement is that many people have one or more traits in common with autistic persons. For example, many ADHDers have sensory processing differences, Some people with social anxiety have trouble with eye contact, and many non-autistic persons may also have difficulty with change or transitions. Having one or two traits is not the same as having a little bit of autism. As my autistic friend Andrew says, you could have swollen ankles and not be pregnant.
That's true.
And you can't be a little bit dead.
According to Princess Bride, you can be
mostly dead.
It's only mostly dead. A movie that we watched compulsively because one of us might have autism and the other one definitely has ADHD.
And also, it's a perfect movie.
Agreed. As Elizabeth Pelicano and Jacqueline de Houding noted, a positive sense of autistic identity is also associated with better mental health. First, autism is not a behavior. It is a way of experiencing and responding to the world. And I want everyone to hear that. It's a way that my brain works. It's a way that I think about things. It's not a behavior. It's not an illness. It's just the way that my brain operates.
My experience is that many people who have close to me who have received the diagnosis, it is a positive thing for them because it explains things and it makes them feel like I don't have this behavior because I'm bad or troublesome or antisocial or difficult. This is just that my brain operates different than other people's brains.
When I share, hey, I think you might have autism, at first, everyone is very resistant because there's so many negative associations with autism. But when somebody goes home and does their research and comes back, they're usually really happy,
right?
Because it answers a lot of these questions about why was I struggling in this place? Why did this thing happen? Why did these people treat me this way? It's not just because I'm busted or a broken human. It's because I really, truly process things differently. And I have a way of experiencing and responding to the world that is different from allistic people or, neurotypical folks.
Neurotypical. I almost forget that neurotypical people exist.
I don't meet very many of them, to be fair. I had a client the other day and I was saying, well, you could be struggling for the reasons you said, or it could just be that you have ADHD. And she said, well, do you really think I do? And I said, yeah. Anybody who comes in here and likes me is probably on the spectrum.
Anyone who likes to have conversations the way that I have conversations
is
probably ADHD.
Absolutely. And I was telling her not too long ago, I had a client who came in for a phobia. He was neurotypical. And I could see how little he was enjoying our time together. And he didn't come back because he doesn't like my flights of fancy. He doesn't like the fact that I'm juggling 15 topics at once.
Half out of her mind most of the time.
Constantly circling back and going, oh yeah, let me pick up that thread that I
dropped 20 minutes ago.
Exactly. Actually, that's funny. When I was doing my NET, neuro-emotional technique certification, we had to do a live session with a moderator who was watching my every move. And I got nearly to the end and realized, oh gosh, I skipped a step, 20 steps back. And I went back and caught it. And he said, I have never seen anyone do that before. And I said, well, I have medication. That's how I picked that one back up.
You sent me a quote about the importance of the scientific method. Pay attention to the original normative group. Many older scales were normed groups with mostly boys and fewer girls, with younger children and or with children with clearly observable autism rather than less obvious autism. If the normative group did not include individuals with an obvious presentation of autism, then the measure will not be as sensitive to this population. If when you're studying autism, you're studying the most affected, they're going to look very different than people with less obvious autism or people who have, for one reason or another, been able to socialize and hide a lot of their, mask a lot of their traits. It's going to be less obvious.
Yeah. Paying attention to the older scales. I feel like the issue is these rating scales were based on white, young boys who were causing problems in the class. And I think that you have to understand that just like most things in life, everything is on a scale. The folks that come into my office who have never been diagnosed are quote unquote high functioning, i.e. they're very good at masking. They have social skills. They have relationships. They're not fitting into that very, very narrow definition. And so that's why they've never been diagnosed. But that's also why they struggle so much because they have this incredible burnout because they've spent so much of their life
and energy
pretending to be this person that they're not so that they can quote unquote fit in.
I have experienced people reacting with shock and anger to being asked, have you ever been diagnosed as being on the spectrum? A couples therapist therapist asked my partner that, and that was the last time that we saw her because he heard it as an insult. What I wish I could tell him now is I've never been involved with anybody who was not on the spectrum.
I mean, this is not causation, but it is correlation and it's also causation.
I'm not making people autistic.
You might be creating autism in folks.
Wow.
You never know.
Rebecca, I'm sorry. It's actually my fault.
I blame Virginia. She's the reason that everyone has autism. As you know, everybody's autistic. You can
Hooray.
So, Rebecca, I hope I've answered your question. I do feel like there are influencers who are saying stuff, but I think it's because it's real. I think that folks are self-diagnosing themselves because the brush is very, very rigid and small. And I do feel like a lot of therapists are not diagnosing people for all the reasons I've just described. And I don't think that that means you shouldn't go to therapy. I think if you're struggling, you should go to therapy and see if the person is a good fit, even if they don't diagnose you with autism. But I think a good seasoned professional who has a lot of experience with neurodivergent patients and clients is going to sniff it out. And as in all things, not every therapist is good at their job. We can't just say, go to a therapist and all your problems will be solved.
But TikTok is not going to be better for you than therapy. I will say that.
No.
You can learn a lot of ideas. You can open you up to other possibilities, but it's not.
There's little pearls of wisdom that I have.
It's not going to replace therapy.
No.
And it's not better than therapy.
Just like in our self-help episode, if you haven't heard it, go back and check it out. Reading a self-help book will give you insights, will help you out, but it's never going to be a replacement for therapy. I don't know why people are not asking for accommodations in college or school. I think that's kind of sad because I think if you need accommodation, you should take it. Until DEI is completely overturned and we've gotten rid of all accommodations, let's try to take advantage of what's out there.
Also, maybe these self-diagnosed kids feel like their issues are minor enough that they don't need accommodation, which means they don't deserve it. When I started taking depression medication a couple of years ago, I was very resistant because I'd always felt like if I can get by without it, then let's not take it.
Why get the help?
Right. And then when I started taking it, I'm like, why did I not do this for so long? If it helps, do it.
And I encounter this all the time with ADHD. I will have people come in and just list every symptom is ADHD. And I will say, hey, maybe you should think about being prescribed a stimulant. It has helped me a lot. And they look at me like I'm suggesting that they snort heroin or something. I'm telling you that this is out there. It exists and it's very helpful.
Now, snorting heroin is not going to help your ADHD, but it is going to help you really relax and have a chill day.
You'll be very chill. It's not going to help you with your ADHD symptoms. It will probably, in fact, worsen them. So, Virginia, in closing, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
I think this is an interesting topic to bring up. I think it's an interesting time to bring it up because I think one of the nice things about TikTok's interest in neurodivergence is the normalization of it and helping to express how many different people have neurodivergence that are doing all kinds of things and having all kinds of lives. I understand how it feels like, oh, this was never a problem when we were growing up. Well, it was, except for instead of being treated for autism or having their parents get helpful tips on bringing up a kid on the spectrum, they would just get beaten.
Or put into a mental hospital or given schizophrenia drugs that were not going to help them at all.
Or put into a class for developmentally delayed kids when they weren't. They were just expressing their thoughts and feelings in ways that we could not understand. Laura, what are your final thoughts about this topic?
I'm really grateful that Rebecca brought this to our attention because it did force me to read this book that has been sitting on a shelf for a while. And this is a topic, obviously, that I'm very passionate about and I'm excited about. And we've mentioned it a little bit in other episodes, but I do like having a whole episode based on it. I've learned a lot from this book and I've learned a lot about diagnosing folks and I'm hoping to get better at it. And hopefully I will be a therapist that people can trust to help them with this issue. Virginia, if someone wants to find out about comedy and not about autism, how can they find you?
Well, first of all, I think I would be remiss if I did not mention a few of my favorite comedians who are on the spectrum. Hannah Gadsby, the very funny Laura Bites. Mike Kaplan is a very funny comic who I have worked with a lot. I make a joke about how he's also a vegan person. So his audience is all either vegan or spectrum. And sometimes there's a crossover and you get both.
Like with my sister, Virginia Jones.
You can find me on www.badinia.com. I am also on TikTok at Badinia. And I am also suffering under the yoke of a fascist system on Instagram at Badinia. Laura, where can people find you or the podcast?
They can find me at my professional website, lauraryan.org. They can find at a very unprofessional TikTok account, I am Laura Ryan. They can find more about the podcast on mysistersatherapist.com, or they can find us on our Instagram page, My Sister's a Therapist.
Laura, this is the part of the podcast where you sometimes read a comment or a review by one of our wonderful listeners. Do you have something to read this week?
I do. This is an Amazon review from Jonas Polsky. Title is Lots of Fun. This is a really fun podcast about sisterhood and mental health. Laura and Virginia have a great bond and they make me laugh a lot. I'd recommend this podcast to comedy fans and anyone interested in therapy or self-improvement. Thanks, Jonas.
Thank you, Jonas. That's really sweet. And we would like to leave you not only with the wise words of Jonas Polsky, but also with the immortal words of Billy Ray Valentine, Capricorn, when he said, "We can make it, baby."
Me and you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.